Hello, I'm Charles Vox-Patak, and I will be talking about the article of impact of inquiry-based learning in nursing education. This article comes out of the Journal of Nursing Education. While it is not an article strictly about education, it is talking about how it is working within a field, a particular field. This is a correlation study without a control group. They had two tests that they used. One was at, you would just say at the beginning, and then they used one towards the end. The first test is how they set up their groups. So you would have a high, medium, and low based off of how they scored. So high would obviously go with the highest scores, medium, low, and or medium would go with the low score, go with the medium's range, and low would obviously be the lower ones. They found that there was no statistical difference between the overall group. And in fact, when they looked at the high and the medium group, they in some cases saw a backwards trend. However, when they looked at the low group, independent of the overall sampling, they found that the low group actually were having growth from doing inquiry-based learning. So this led the researchers to the conclusion that inquiry-based learning was most beneficial to the lower group. So it would be best to apply it to the people that you feel that may struggle throughout your course. And I think that is the main takeaway that we can pull from and apply it to other fields besides just education in regards to nursing.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Martins, and I'm speaking today about the article Can Inquiry-Based Instruction Promote Higher Level Learning? What's interesting about this article is that once the researchers involved in this looked around to find other literature that pertain to this subject, they found that there really wasn't a lot. It's a very under-researched area, and of the ones that did kind of go toward this topic, they found that one in particular had such a variety of strategies and learning models kind of thrown in together that it doesn't really become usable for this topic. And so they decided to set up their own experiment. They found that their first one really wasn't set up particularly well, and it left too many variables and kind of left it with questionable validity as far as the topic went. So they set it up again. They tried to limit for those variables. They did end up with a smaller group, which then kind of leaves a question onto the validity of the second experiment. But with the limitation of all the variables involved, it does seem that it's viable research and certainly has its place in this discussion. So what they found is that it does help, that inquiry-based instruction does promote higher level learning. The results on both of the experiments, even with the variables and without, certainly shows a relationship between the inquiry-based instruction and higher level learning. And that's definitely worth noting, even with some questions about their methods and their group and what they put toward it. This page goes into further detail about what the experiments were and kind of the setup. And that experiment one we determined was a quasi-experimental design because of some of those variables in the design of it itself that I mentioned in the previous slide. And then that the second one, they tried it to do, the randomized control group and set it up in a more experimental design. And that's really what this page talks about. This slide shows our conclusions about the methods and procedures. And in experiment number one, the researchers had a little bit more time in between the first assessment and the second one, and that they repeated in the second experiment, they repeated the same Kohlberg's theory of morality development. They used that same method, but they limited the time in between and tried to have a little bit more limit to that time in between so that the validity, the measurable learning was a little bit more pure, I guess, in some ways, that there wouldn't be any other outside influences that perhaps could detract away from the results of the experiment itself. And so that direct instruction of the same material and even the inquiry based then was a little bit cleaner on the second one, and that's outlined in the methods and procedures section there. And then in 4 it talks about how the first group was a better sample size, it had 87, and then in the second experiment they had fewer students, but that, limiting all of those outside variables, would still enhance the validity of it overall, even though it was a smaller sample. This slide shows the statistical significance and implications of this study and of the paper that we were discussing. Experiment 1 and 2 both had very similar results that we found, and the authors are claiming statistical significance, but there are some questions about that because of the sampling size in number 2 and the randomized, the lack of a randomized control group might lessen their claims as far as that goes. But it was good that the results 1 also supported number 2's claims, and I think the authors are clearly saying in this piece of writing that, hey, this is not a definitive thing, and it's calling for, hey, we need a larger sampling, we need to have another view at this and put it into some different environments perhaps. Implication wise, what I liked about this one, I think we kind of all agreed, is that lower and higher level learning both have their place in any learning process. And while direct instruction helped with the foundational levels, the students did seem to do better and remember more later if they used inquiry-based learning for higher levels. So I don't think we'll ever get away from a need for direct-based or direct instruction based learning. It's always going to have to be some foundational knowledge. We need simple facts, to kind of go forward into, our higher level learning. It doesn't matter whether that comes from teachers, I think sometimes, or valid sources that we might find online, or guest speakers, or whomever we can find, or whatever we can find to support that. As far as the group's overall evaluation, which begins at the bottom of this slide, just that we like the research and the inquiry-based instruction study, but that we found it had some limitations. This is the last of this article's slides, and really our final thought on this was that it's a good paper, and it was a good study for someone to write about, but that it is in no way kind of the end of the story on this topic. It was a very limited study, and it had really some possible flaws in it, as mentioned here. And if anything, the group acknowledges that and says, hey, somebody needs to kind of pick this up and run with it and find out more. I don't think the results are surprising to anybody, particularly in education. I don't think we hear too many people saying, oh no, direct instruction is the only way. I do think that sometimes is our fallback position on certain topics because it's always been that way, or that we are comfortable with it that way. And inquiry-based learning certainly does take a little bit of additional work and imagination and creativity from us, at least initially. So that's it was a good article for highlighting an area that needs further research.
Hello, my name is Danielle Sebastian, and I will be presenting the essential resources for the inquiry training model. Our first essential resource comes from the Teaching Inquiry Learning video by Mark Challoner. It's very easy to access on YouTube, which is a plus for teachers who are interested in becoming more fluent in this style. The video gives a graphic overview of the inquiry learning. It provides the who, what, and why of the teaching style. It also is very easy to see in its visuals, and it goes into depth as to how to implement this style in your classroom. Our next resource, titled Inquiry-Based Learning, is a part of a series entitled Capacity Building Series, which was developed in Canada. So this PDF provides an overview of what inquiry-based learning is, why it is important, and what the student and teacher's roles are. It gives examples of how to implement this method of teaching into lessons, and it provides generalized tips for succeeding, including teaching on a need-to-know basis. It concludes by providing exact questions to make sure that progress is made, success is monitored, and reflection is included as a necessary last step. It even gives examples of common student responses to certain questions and how to handle these. It's a great tool to use if you need to brush up on your inquiry-based learning instructions, as well as just making sure that you're on task and making sure that your students are learning. From the Buffalo Catholic Schools Conference entitled Inquiry-Based Learning. This resource covers the entire inquiry-based learning model and has many resources that are available on its website. Besides the resources incorporated into the different sections of the website, the right side of the page has links to further research. Designed by Doctors Karen Donner and Maria Grande, this site offers any level of educator a fully explained view of inquiry-based learning, as well as additional resources that will assist us in developing our own projects. The process of composing an inquiry-based lesson is included, as well as the theories behind the teaching model. Even better, the website contains specific pages that are devoted to one strategy, and resources needed are included. This website is thoroughly researched and is usable for educators of all levels. This resource comes from a blog entitled A Principal's Reflections, Raising the Bar on Learning by Eric Scheniger. This blog post gives a very simple yet visual representation of the inquiry-based learning process. The author explains the process and the benefits that this teaching style has on students. He also then explains the pushback that may occur from students and parents who are unfamiliar with this model. He also gives personal examples to touch base on what he's talking about. So this man used to be a teacher, and then he became a principal. Lastly, he gives a link to additional resources that you can see on YouTube of teachers who are using inquiry-based learning. You can see what the process looks like in an actual classroom.
This is Heidi Kirby, and my component of this project is to present the model lesson that we created for the inquiry training model. I think the thing that we really took away from this particular lesson was being able to create our own lesson of the model. So instead of viewing how other people were using it in their classroom, we were really able to create it in ourselves within our own boundaries and within our own set of skills and knowledge. As you can see here, we decided to stick with grades 9 through 12 for our model lesson, mostly because that was the grade level that most of us are teaching, and also with the objectives that we chose and kind of the content of the lesson, we felt that it was better for an older age group. We also chose to focus on study skills and how to improve study skills. This way, our lesson could be transferred into any content area, and so we were able to kind of all understand it a little bit better. Our objectives were to assess study skills to find out which ones are best. This learner is also going to hypothesize kind of the different levels of studying for tests and how to prioritize their time. And they're going to hypothesize the outcomes of different methods of studying as well. What we're going to do, or what the teacher is going to do in this particular model, we have a scenario where we present 3 different students, 3 things that they did, 3 courses of action, and then 3 different grades that they received on a test. Here's where the students ask questions one of the main components of the inquiry training model. They begin to ask yes or no questions as a whole class or on a piece of paper, and then they can start to ask one by one in small groups. And then they're going to create their own little fact sheet here to kind of start to hypothesize what it is exactly that happened to these 3 students, why their grades were different. So they're going to kind of share their hypotheses and kind of discuss the whole course of events of each student. Then the students are going to discuss the actual inquiry process, which is another big part of it, to kind of have that wrap-up discussion at the end where we say, what information helped you form your hypothesis? What questions were important? Why were these questions important? That type of thing. How did you look at these large chunks of information and then make small inferences based on that? Then the idea at the end is to kind of make this master list of good study skills that students can actually use and gain from. Assessment is a little bit short, and we've added a couple of things here. We want the students to be in small groups and to collect their different fact sheets. Then we have something concrete as instructors or teachers to kind of look at and see where the students' minds went. Obviously, observing the student during this actual experiment, being able to provide them with praise and with immediate feedback during the exercise. The small discussion at the end of the class, talking about what they've learned, what it is that's helpful about the inquiry training model, and especially how they can use these skills in other courses, specifically with our example of study skills. And then for homework, students are going to create their own letter from the student who did well to the student who didn't do so well, to kind of explain what good study habits are and what they look like. So kind of bringing everything together to talk about the good study skills that were learned. The nice thing about this lesson is that there really aren't that many materials needed. You have to have the scenario as the teacher, you have to have the fact sheet, and then you have student sheets for them to fill out, and homework sheets as well. Finally, we've created the actual fact sheet that the teacher would have on hand as he or she is being asked the yes or no questions by the students. Why is this important? Well, obviously, the teacher has an idea of what the scenarios are, what Natalie did, what John did, what Sarah did. But it can be kind of confusing to keep track of all of them, and you know, what if you answer yes to one group and you answer no to the other, and now you have conflicting information. So we just came up with a fact sheet trying to cover as many bases as possible. So how long did these students spend studying? What did they do to study? What was their level of time management and kind of their priorities of what else was going on in their lives at the time, even down to what they did the morning of the test. And the most specific part, the notes that they took in class while they were learning this material that they were tested on. So it kind of gives an all-encompassing resource for the teacher to use to be able to answer any yes or no questions that might come up. And that is the last piece of our model lesson.
I'm Brittany Thompson, and I will present the bumper sticker we have created for the inquiry training model. An important takeaway we learned was the importance of questioning and investigating in our particular model. This includes the problem at hand or the learning process itself. Here's a portion of our completed brainstorming graphic organizer. The words in bold, questioning, experimenting, and investigating, were the frequently repeated terms with all of our group members. You can also see the phrases and slogans we first brainstormed to adapt to our model, one of which is, "I came, I saw, I conquered." Here are the slogans we came up with for our model. We decided to choose the phrase, "I puzzled, I questioned, I hypothesized." In our completed bumper sticker creation, we represented each section with an image. The puzzle represents the puzzling situation that starts the inquiry process. It seemed fitting and memorable. The magnifying glass in questions was chosen because, one, the learner will use a series of questions to examine the event, and also it's reminiscent of the act of examining the inquiry process itself, which is the final phase of the model. The light bulb illustrates the hypothesis in the sense that the learner learns something new and kind of generates an explanation to the phenomenon, much like the light bulb generates light. Again, the important insight we gained from this component of the project is about the focus and importance on questioning. I think that the fact that the questioning kind of ended up in the center of the bumper sticker really emphasizes that point. We would appreciate feedback on our image choices, as well as if our bumper sticker actually translated our intended meaning, and overall the model itself.